Everyone in the village stopped moving the moment she said her name. Not when she arrived. Not when she asked for directions. But when she said, Asante. And the man who owned the entire coastline had already been watching her before she stepped off the bus. The bus dropped Amara Asante at the edge of Hamelry just as the sea fog began crawling over the wooden docks. She stepped off with one large suitcase, a carry-on bag, and the kind of confidence that comes from spending 6 years investigating coastal fraud for one of London's sharpest marine insurance firms. She was used to walking into uncomfortable places and asking uncomfortable questions. What she was not used to was the smell. Salt, dried fish, and something older underneath that she could not name. She pulled her bright orange scarf tighter and looked around. The village was small and gray and sitting right at the edge of the water like it was daring the sea to come closer. Wooden docks stretched out below. Stone cottages climbed the cliff above. And every single person she could see had stopped moving. Old men mending nets. Women stacking crates. A boy on a bicycle. All of them perfectly still, watching her the way you watch something fall before it hits the ground. Amara was a professional. She kept walking. She stopped at the small grocery near the cliff path and asked for directions to the Asante cottage. The shopkeeper's face changed the moment the name left her mouth. He dropped his metal scoop. It rang out loud in the quiet street. He did not answer her. He pointed a shaking finger up the cliff path and turned his back before she could say thank you. The Asante name, she noted mentally, meant something in this village. She would find out what. The cottage sat at the top of the trail, small and solid, built from the same gray stone as the cliffs around it. It looked out over the water with the quiet dignity of something that had survived a great deal. Amara liked it immediately. She pulled the brass key from her coat pocket, the one the estate agent had couriered to her 2 days ago. Pushed it into the lock, and twisted. Nothing. She tried again, putting her shoulder into the door. Still nothing. She was 3 minutes into a quiet argument with the door when a shadow fell over her. She turned around. The man standing behind her was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long dark coat. His face was completely still, not unfriendly exactly, but the kind of still that tells you this person has not needed to explain themselves to anyone in a very long time. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask if she needed help. He simply stepped forward, took the key from her hand without asking, pressed his palm flat against the upper left corner of the door frame, and turned the key once with a specific, firm motion. The lock clicked. The door swung open. He handed the key back without letting his fingers touch hers and walked away into the fog without a single word. Amara stood in the open doorway and watched him disappear. She had spent 6 years reading situations for a living. This one was already telling her something she had not expected to hear. She stepped inside, set her bag down, and knelt to look at the floorboards beneath her grandmother's old desk. Something caught her eye in the low light. Carved into the dark wood in small, careful letters was a single word. Ghost. Amara sat back on her heels and looked at it for a long time. Her grandmother had lived in this village for 30 years and told the family almost nothing about it. Amara had come to sell the cottage and leave within 2 weeks. She was already revising that plan. Amara was a light sleeper. It was an occupational habit. She had investigated too many cases where the important detail was the thing that happened quietly while everyone else was resting. So when she woke at dawn and walked into the living room, she noticed it immediately. The broken window latch that had been hanging by one screw the night before was now perfectly straight. New metal, clean screws, no gap in the frame. The cold draft was gone. Someone had come into the cottage while she slept, fixed the latch, and left without making a sound. She stood there in her socks, running through the logic of it. Not a threat. Not a robbery. A repair. Which in some ways was stranger than either. She got dressed and walked down the cliff path toward the docks. She was not angry, exactly. She was assembling information. The cold storage facility sat at the base of the dock road, large and humming, its refrigeration units pushing warm air into the cold morning. Every fishing family in Hamelry and for 80 kilometers along the coast depended on that building. Without it, their catch spoiled before it reached a buyer. Amara knew this because she had read the cooperative's insurance history on the flight from London. It was the kind of detail her firm paid her to notice. Standing on the high concrete platform beside it, looking out at the water with his back to her, was the man from the night before. She walked straight up to him from behind. She told him clearly and professionally that she did not appreciate people entering her property without permission. She told him that in her line of work, unauthorized access to a premises was a serious matter. She told him that she understood village customs were different from city ones but that some standards were universal. She spoke for almost 4 minutes, making each point cleanly, the way she would in a client meeting. He did not turn around. He stood with his hands behind his back looking at the water while she talked, the way a cliff face stands in the wind. Patient, unmoved, and completely certain that nothing she said was going to change the shape of it. When she finally stopped, the silence was enormous. He turned his head slightly. Not enough to look at her directly. Just enough to let her know he had heard everything and had decided on the weight of it. He said nothing. He turned back to the water. Amara walked back up the cliff feeling the particular frustration of someone who has made a perfect argument to a wall. She pushed open the cottage door, stepped inside, and stopped. A man was sitting at her kitchen table. He was not the man from the docks. This one was wearing a very expensive gray suit that had no business being in a fishing village. He was slim, neat, and sitting with the relaxed comfort of someone who has never once been asked to leave a room. He had a pleasant face and careful eyes, and he looked at her the way a person looks at a property they are already measuring in their mind. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and extended his hand. "Minho," he said, as if that was all the introduction the room required. "I represent a development group with significant interest in this coastline." He smiled. "Your grandmother's cottage sits on a very valuable piece of land, Miss Asante. I would love to talk about your plans for it." He was still smiling when he walked past her to the front door, opened it himself, and left. On her pillow, perfectly centered, was a white business card with a single phone number printed on it. Amara picked it up, turned it over, and felt the familiar cold clarity that came at the beginning of every serious investigation. This was not a courtesy visit. Amara had not planned to attend the village meal. She had planned to spend the evening cross-referencing her grandmother's papers with the coastal permits she had pulled from the public registry. But the 3 older women who arrived at her door just before sunset were not really offering an invitation. They were providing an escort. The community hall near the docks was large, drafty, and filled with the smell of spicy fish stew and something sweet frying in oil somewhere near the back. Long wooden tables ran the length of the room, packed with villagers who all found something very interesting to look at the moment Amara walked through the door. She had spent enough time in uncomfortable rooms to know when she was the topic of a conversation that had just been suspended. She was led to the head table. The seat saved for her was next to Kong Woo Jin. She had not learned his name yet. She had been thinking of him privately as the man from the fog, which was accurate if not particularly professional. He was already seated, looking straight ahead, his presence taking up more space than his physical size accounted for. The village organized itself quietly around him the way water organizes itself around a stone. Nobody bumped his chair. Nobody spoke across him. The 2 seats on his other side were empty. Amara sat down. The meal began. Metal spoons hit ceramic bowls. Conversations resumed at every other table at a careful, steady volume. At the head table, the silence was architectural. Amara lasted 4 minutes. She turned to him and began to talk about Minho. She explained that the development offer was not necessarily unreasonable. She talked about coastal property values in comparable markets. She pointed out that new facilities could bring infrastructure the village clearly lacked. She was not arguing for Minho. She was testing Woo Jin, watching how he responded to information the way she would test a source. His face gave her nothing. His soup got steadily smaller. She kept talking. One of the older women across the table leaned toward her neighbor and whispered that Minho's development group had deep connections inside the Regional Coastal Planning Authority. Had for years, apparently. The neighbor nodded without surprise. Amara filed that detail quietly and kept her expression neutral. Then Wu Jin placed his hand flat on the table. It was not a loud sound. Barely a sound at all. But every spoon in the hall stopped moving. Every conversation died. The whole room went still in the time it takes to blink, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing Amara had ever heard. She picked up her spoon and said nothing for the rest of the meal. Walking back up the cliff path alone afterward, the fog so thick she could barely see her feet, she nearly missed the figure at the corner of the cottage. Minho was standing against the stone wall with a long measuring tape pressed to the foundation, writing in a small notebook, his movements brisk and certain. He looked up when he heard her boots on the path. He smiled like a man measuring something he already owned. Amara woke early and did what she always did at the start of a complicated case. She made tea, sat at her grandmother's desk, and began building a picture from the pieces already in the room. Her grandmother, Abina Asante, had arrived in Haemulri in 1991 as a marine biology researcher attached to a South Korean coastal conservation program. She was supposed to stay 2 years. She stayed 30. The research program ended. She didn't leave with it. She had sent letters home regularly, warm, careful letters full of weather descriptions and fish observations and very little else. Amara had always assumed her grandmother was simply a private woman who loved the sea. She was beginning to understand that privacy and secrecy are two different things entirely. She spent the morning tapping walls. It was something her grandmother had taught her during the one childhood visit Amara could still remember clearly. She had been 9 years old. Abina had walked her through the cottage, pressing her palm flat against the plaster every few steps, listening. "A house keeps its driest places hidden," she had said. "Tap until it tells you where they are." It had felt like a game then. Now Amara moved through the rooms with professional attention, pressing and listening, until her knuckles found a section behind the kitchen pantry that sounded different from everything around it. She pulled. A narrow panel came free. Inside was a small black notebook. Her hands moved fast, opening it. Then she went still. Grocery lists. Weather observations. Fish counts from 10 years ago. Nothing. She set it down slowly, understanding. It was a decoy. Her grandmother had placed it there deliberately for anyone who came looking and knew enough to find the panel but not enough to know what they were really looking for. She was still sitting with the fake notebook in her lap when the air in the cottage changed. She did not hear the door. She simply felt the shift in the room, the way a space reorganizes itself around a specific kind of presence. She looked up. Kong Wu Jin was standing in the kitchen doorway, his eyes moving from her face to the open panel in the wall and back again. He said nothing. His expression said nothing. But he stepped into the room and stood across from her with the quiet patience of a man who had been waiting for this particular moment for longer than she had been in the village. Amara's patience had run out sometime between the business card on her pillow and the man measuring her foundation in the fog. She looked up at him and asked, her voice steady, whether she was a guest in this village or a piece being moved around a board by people who had not bothered to introduce the game. Wu Jin looked at her for a long moment. Then he said 7 words. "He wants the house. You are leverage." The clarity of it hit her the way cold water hits, immediate, total, and impossible to ignore. She was not here because of a cottage. She was here because of whatever her grandmother had hidden, and Minho knew it, and the man standing in her kitchen had known it from the moment she stepped off the bus. She opened her mouth to respond. The front window exploded inward. When she turned back, he was no longer in the room. Not glass, the latch gave way under the force of the sea wind, the old frame finally surrendering to a gust that had been building all morning, sending the shutter crashing against the inner wall. Cold air poured into the room. In the gap of the open window, pinned under the shutter's edge, was a small yellow envelope that had clearly been pushed through the gap from outside. It hadn't just arrived with the wind. It had been left there, waiting for the moment the latch gave way. Amara crossed the room and picked it up. Inside was a single card. Beneath it, 4 words in careful English. Before the tide turns. She didn't need to wonder who had sent it. Amara set the card on the desk beside the decoy notebook and looked at both of them for a long moment. Then she went back to her grandmother's papers. She had been reading them as personal documents. She was a marine insurance investigator. She should have been reading them as evidence. She made fresh tea, spread the research papers across the desk, and started again from the beginning. Abina had recorded 30 years of tide charts, fish population counts, and coastal weather patterns in the kind of precise, consistent detail that only a trained researcher produces. Amara had assumed this was professional habit. But as she moved through the pages with the eye she used for disputed shipping claims, a second pattern emerged underneath the first. The fish counts were not just fish counts. Certain numbers, recorded on specific dates, corresponded to nothing in the tidal or seasonal data. They were a separate record, running quietly inside the official one the way a shadow runs alongside a person without anyone thinking to look at it directly. Her grandmother had been keeping 2 sets of books. One for the conservation program. One for someone else. Amara went still. The word on the floor came back to her, clear as if she were standing over it again. Ghost. Not a warning. Not a name. A label. For everything that wasn't supposed to exist. The missing shipments. The unrecorded movements. The second set of numbers hidden inside the first. Her grandmother hadn't just been recording data. She had been tracking what the system was built to hide. Amara sat back and thought about the cold storage building at the docks. About the cooperative that every fishing family for 80 kilometers depended on. About the man who ran both and fixed window latches at midnight and said 7 words when 7 words were all that was necessary. Wu Jin's father had built something that kept this village alive. Abina had kept the real record of it, the honest account of every movement, every arrangement, every quiet agreement that made the system work. She had been the one person outside the syndicate who held the full picture, trusted precisely because she had no stake in it and no fear of it. Amara understood now why the village had gone still when she said her grandmother's name. She was still working through the pages when she heard footsteps on the porch. Not Wu Jin's footsteps. She had already learned the difference. His were unhurried, evenly weighted, the walk of someone who has never needed to rush toward anything because things tend to wait for him. These were quicker. More deliberate. Performing confidence rather than owning it. She did not get up. Minho opened the screen door and leaned against the frame without coming inside. He was dressed as precisely as before, but the pleasantness was gone from his face the way paint goes when the surface beneath it gets wet. He told her, in a voice designed to sound reasonable, that he was prepared to increase his offer significantly. He talked about her father's financial situation in London, specific numbers, specific debts, in the tone of someone reading from a file they have had for a long time. He was telling her he had been watching her family before she even knew this village existed. He gave her until morning. I don't like repeating myself, he said mildly. Then he pulled the screen door shut behind him and walked back down the path. Amara sat for a moment with the particular stillness that comes not from calm but from the moment just before a decision becomes clear. She looked at the pages spread across her grandmother's desk. She thought about what Abina had chosen, 30 years ago, standing in this same village with this same sea outside the window. Then she went back to the numbers. An hour later she found it. Tide charts. Specific dates. Coordinates marked in her grandmother's handwriting in the margin of a page dated 1994. She pulled up a coastal map on her phone and marked each point with her finger. The lines crossed at a single location. Not the cottage. Not the cooperative. The abandoned lighthouse at the edge of the cliffs, dark for 20 years, standing in the fog like something still waiting to be useful. She stared at the map. Outside, the tide was turning. Amara did not go to the lighthouse that night. She was a professional, and professionals do not walk alone to abandoned clifftop structures in the dark based on a single set of coordinates. She went in the morning, early, when the fog was still low but the light was beginning to come through it. The lighthouse was smaller than it looked from the village. The door was padlocked, but the padlock was new, which told her someone else had been here recently and had wanted to keep it closed. She photographed it, noted the brand, and walked the perimeter of the base, checking the stonework. Her grandmother's coordinates had pointed to a specific compass bearing from the lighthouse door. Amara walked that bearing for 12 meters and stopped at a flat stone set slightly apart from the others in the cliff path. She did not lift it. Not yet. She went back to the village. She found Wu Jin at the cooperative office, a plain room overlooking the dock with a metal desk and no decoration except a tide chart pinned to the wall. She had expected him to be difficult to reach. He was simply there, at his desk, as if he had been expecting her at approximately this time. She sat across from him without being invited and told him what she had found. Not the coordinates, not yet. She told him what she had understood about her grandmother's role. She didn't carve it to hide anything, Amara said. She carved it so she would never forget where to start. No one who saw it would understand it. She told him she knew the records existed and she knew they were not in the cottage. She watched his face while she talked. It gave her almost nothing, which in her professional experience meant she was correct about everything and he was deciding how much to confirm. He confirmed all of it. Quietly, without drama. He told her about his father. About the arrangement Abina had agreed to. About why the village needed the cooperative to run the way it ran, not through fear, but through the kind of order that only holds together when one person is trusted completely to maintain it. He said that without the cooperative's influence, the large processing companies from the city would have absorbed every fishing family in the region within a decade. He said this without asking her to agree with it. She did not fully agree with it. She told him so, specifically, on 2 points, the lack of transparency with the younger villagers, and the way Minho had been allowed to get close enough to become a real threat. She made both points without raising her voice. He had no answer for the second one. She could see that it cost him something to have no answer. She told him about the lighthouse coordinates. She told him she had not gone to look yet because she wanted him to be there when she did. He looked at her steadily for a moment, and she had the sense again of someone recalibrating, the way a precise instrument adjusts when the conditions around it change. He stood up. He took his coat from the back of the chair. They walked to the lighthouse together, not speaking, the fog still low around their boots. Amara lifted the flat stone at the 12-meter bearing. Beneath it was a waterproof case, gray and solid, the kind used for marine equipment. Inside the case were notebooks, 10 of them, wrapped in oilskin, each one dated in her grandmother's careful handwriting. 30 years of the real record. Wu Jin stood very still looking at them. Amara watched his face and saw, briefly and completely, something she had not expected to see there. Not relief. Not calculation. Something quieter than both of those things. A man who had carried something very heavy for a very long time, suddenly standing next to the person who understood exactly how heavy it had been. She closed the case and handed it to him. "My grandmother trusted you," she said. "I think she was a good judge." From the path below the lighthouse, a car door closed. The papers inside were in eminent domain order. The cottage and the surrounding coastal land were being compulsorily acquired for a public infrastructure project. The order was stamped, signed, and dated 3 days ago. Minho had filed it before Amara had even finished her first week in the village. He had not been negotiating with her. He had been giving her the chance to leave quietly before the machinery he had already set in motion arrived. Amara read it twice on the cliff path with the sea wind pulling at the pages. Then a third time, slowly, the way she read disputed insurance documents, looking not for what was there but for what was missing. She found it on page 4. The eminent domain filing required an independent environmental survey for any coastal land acquisition within 50 meters of the tidal zone. The cottage sat 32 meters from the high water mark. The survey was referenced in the paperwork but not attached. It had not been completed. The entire order rested on a procedural foundation that simply was not there. She told Wu Jin. He listened without interrupting. She explained that this did not solve the problem permanently. Minho would commission the survey and refile. But it bought real time, measured in months not days, and gave her legal grounds to contest the order as sole heir to the estate. She could file the challenge through her firm's legal desk in London. Wu Jin looked at her for a moment. You would do that? I investigate coastal fraud professionally, she said. This is coastal fraud. He nodded once. Then he made a call of his own, quietly, stepping away from her along the cliff path. She did not hear what was said. She did not ask. But within the hour, two things happened that she only connected later. The regional planning official who had delivered the papers was seen leaving the village in his car with the specific hurried energy of a man who has just received news he did not want. And the ice supplier who had quietly withdrawn from the cooperative's contract that morning sent a message reinstating the agreement with an apology about a scheduling error that had never been a scheduling error. Wu Jin said nothing about either of these things. That evening Amara sat at her grandmother's desk drafting the formal legal challenge, her laptop open, the London firm's template on screen. She was halfway through the second section when her phone lit up. A message. No name. A number she did not recognize. Stop the filing. Or the cooperative loses its cold storage license by Friday. Minho still had his planning authority connection and he was using it. Amara set her phone face down and sat in the quiet for a moment. Then she picked it up and called her supervisor in London. She had 3 weeks of unused leave. She was going to need all of it. The cold storage license threat changed the atmosphere of the village the way a pressure change changes the sky before a storm. Nothing looked different. Everything felt different. The workers moved with a quietness that was not their usual quietness. The women at the market spoke in shorter sentences. The village was holding its breath and everyone knew why, even the people who had not been told directly. Amara spent the morning on calls with her firm's international legal team in London, building the case against Minho's license challenge. His filing had gone through his contact in the regional planning authority, not clean, but not obviously illegal either. Blocking it required specific documentation about the cooperative's compliance history. Documentation that only Wu Jin could provide, and that would mean opening the cooperative's books to an outside firm for the first time. She went to find him at the docks. He was already 3 moves ahead of where she expected him to be. The mainland ice supplier who had reinstated their contract that morning had apparently also introduced Wu Jin to a second supplier as backup, arranged quietly through a relationship Wu Jin had maintained for years without ever needing to use it until now. The planning authority contact that Minho relied on had, according to the woman at the market who knew everything and said most of it, called in sick that morning and was not expected back before the weekend. Wu Jin had not mentioned any of this to Amara. She found him on the phone, voice low and steady. She waited. When he finished she told him what she needed, the compliance records, 3 years minimum, submitted through her firm so the license challenge could be formally contested on documented grounds. He was quiet for a moment. It was exactly the kind of transparency the cooperative had never operated with. She watched him weigh it and did not rush him. My grandmother kept 2 sets of records for 30 years, she said quietly. She did it to protect this place. I am asking for 1 set. To do the same thing. He made a call. Within the hour his second-in-command arrived at the cottage with 3 years of compliance folders, organized and complete. Amara built the counter-filing through the afternoon with the focus that had made her one of her firm's most reliable investigators. By evening it was done. Her legal contact confirmed the license challenge would be suspended within 48 hours pending independent review. She sat back in her grandmother's chair. There was a knock at the door. Wu Jin was standing on the porch with 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her without a word and stood looking out at the water. The light on the sea was the color of old copper. She stood beside him and they drank in silence that was, for the first time since she arrived, entirely comfortable. After a long moment he said, without looking at her, "She would have liked that you came." Amara looked at her cup. "She never told me about any of this." "No," he said. "She was protecting you." The tide was coming in below them, steady and unhurried. Amara's return flight was in 4 days. The license challenge suspension arrived officially on Thursday morning, which meant Minho had 48 hours before his entire strategy collapsed into a filing error and a compliance review that would take months to resolve. Amara had learned, from 6 years of insurance investigation, that the most dangerous moment in any case is not when the other side is winning. It is when they can see they are about to lose. Minho arrived at the cottage on Thursday afternoon. He did not come alone. He came with his lawyer and a man from the regional planning office who had the uncomfortable look of someone who understood he had backed the wrong arrangement. They stood on the porch in a neat row and Minho spoke through the screen door in the measured tone of a man repositioning rather than retreating. He said the eminent domain order could be withdrawn. He said the license challenge could be dropped. He said there was still a version of this where everyone received something they wanted, if Amara was willing to have a sensible conversation about the cooperative's long-term future and its relationship with outside development interests. Amara stood on the other side of the screen door and listened to all of it. Then she asked him, very calmly, whether his regional planning contact had been informed yet that the environmental survey exemption he had applied for in the original filing had been flagged for independent review by her firm's sole office. She asked whether his investors had been told that the timeline on the project had extended from months to potentially years. She asked whether he had considered that a marine insurance firm with an active interest in the cooperative's compliance history was now formally involved in the case. She asked these questions pleasantly, the way she asked questions in client meetings when she already knew the answers and was giving the other party the opportunity to catch up. The man from the regional planning office looked at Minho. Minho looked at Amara. The lawyer looked at his shoes. By Friday morning Minho's car was gone from the village. His measuring tape, his business cards, his careful notebook, all of it. The cooperative's ice contract was restored by a different mainland supplier before noon. The village exhaled so collectively and completely that Amara felt it walking down the cliff path, the air genuinely lighter than it had been since she arrived. The women from the community hall appeared at her door that evening with food she had not asked for and conversation she could now almost follow. The old man who had dropped his scoop on the first day nodded at her from across the street. The boy on the bicycle rang his bell as he passed. She sat on the porch after they left, in the cold dark, listening to the sea. Her flight was tomorrow. She had not packed. The bus to the city left Hamelry at 7 in the morning. Amara was at the stop with her suitcase at 6:55, her carry-on bag over one shoulder, her orange scarf bright in the gray morning air. She had packed the night before with the same efficiency she packed for every work trip. Clothes, documents, her grandmother's personal letters, the ones that were just letters, the ones that belonged to the family. The research papers and the compliance records she had photographed and filed properly. The decoy notebook she had returned to its place, where it had always been. The cottage she had locked carefully and put the key in her coat pocket. She had not said goodbye to Wu Jin. This was not an oversight. She had considered it and decided against it the way she made most professional decisions, by asking herself what the honest version of the action would look like and whether she was prepared to be honest. She was not sure she was. So she stood at the bus stop in the cold with her suitcase and watched the fog sit on the water and waited for the bus. It came. She got on. 3 weeks later Amara was at her desk in London, working through a disputed cargo claim involving a South Korean shipping company, when she noticed the vessel's registered port of origin. It was a small coastal cooperative on the southern coast. The port code was one she had looked up before. She sat with that for a moment, her pen still on the page. Her supervisor knocked and put his head around the door. The firm had been approached about an ongoing compliance consultancy for a fishing cooperative in South Korea. A formal arrangement, properly contracted, the kind of long-term relationship the firm had been looking to build in that region. He wanted to know if she had any contacts who could speak to the cooperative's reliability. Amara looked at him. "I might know someone," she said. That evening she found a message on her phone. No greeting, no explanation. Just a photograph. The cottage porch, taken from the sea wall. The door frame where he had pressed his palm flat on her first night. In the upper left corner of the frame, barely visible, a new coat of varnish had been applied to the wood. Fresh. Careful. The kind of small maintenance that means someone intends a thing to last. Amara looked at the photograph for a long time. She typed back 2 words. "I know." He replied in 4 seconds with nothing. No message. Just a period. A single full stop, which in the language of a man who used words like they cost him something meant more than a paragraph from anyone else. She put her phone down and went back to the cargo claim. She booked her flight to South Korea the following morning.